How's it going, everyone? Blueknight here, and welcome back to another Sly Cooper video. So Sly Cooper Thieves in Time, or Sly 4 as the community sometimes refers to it, was the last game to be released for the series back in 2013 on the PS3 and the PS Vita. And as many of you are likely already aware of, the game ended on a massive cliffhanger. The movie was announced the following year, it was then shelved in 2017 in favor of a TV show. Sony went under some restructuring when it came to adapting their games to movies and TV shows, and we ain't heard a single thing about any Sly Cooper project ever since. So the current state of the franchise is pretty much floating around in this never-ending void of the unknown, with the occasional merge and Easter eggs that tend to pop up from time to time. But regardless of that, there's been a recent discovery making its rounds within the Sly Cooper community, and that happens to be the initial pitch by Sanzaru Games to Sony for Sly Cooper Thieves in Time, which was originally called Sly Cooper 4 Time Bandits. I don't know about you guys, but Thieves in Time sounds much better if you ask me. Now, most of us are pretty well aware of the fact that Sony was impressed by Sanzaru's prototype, and only after Sony tasked Sanzaru with remastering the original trilogy of games for the PS3 and the Vita, only then would they get the green light to begin work on Sly 4. But what we never got to see was the initial pitch presentation that Sony was so impressed with, and thanks to Roman, Memento, and the moderator of the No Context Sly Cooper account over on Twitter, and also to Breeze for tagging me with this on Twitter. Really appreciated. We are finally able to see what the game actually looked like during that initial pitch, and as you can see in the screenshots, it's pretty easy to tell that this was very early compared to the final game. Like, the buildings aren't as detailed as they were in the final game, actually reminding me a bit of the original trilogy now that I think about it. Even the plants and the grass got kind of a big overhaul between these two versions, and from the looks of it, it looked kinda like they were originally going for a more Sly 1 approach to the game. At least when we combine these screenshots with the Network of Thieves concept art we seen a while back, there appeared to be more linear paths. The van is present right here, likely at the start of the episode just like in the first game, and of course we can't forget about the planned horseshoe mode, which was ultimately cut from the game due to time restraints. Now, looking at Sly's model, it's a bit different compared to the one that's used in the final version of Sly 4. Sure, he's been updated from his Sly 3 model, but without the backpack, the Golden Cooper logo on his belt, and the added fur textures of the final game, this honestly looks like an up-res version of the Sly 3 model, and I really like it. But don't get me wrong, I still like the final version of the Sly 4 model that we got. Moving on to the actual presentation, one of the first things we can see is that this video is dated for October 13th, 2009, but when we look at the video's properties, this PowerPoint presentation started being made in 2008, the very same year Sanzaru showed their Sly 4 prototype to Sony, and that's about a year's difference, so why is that? Well, it's because this particular concept presentation was not focused on the PS3 version of the game. Instead, it was the game running on a dev kit for the NGP, which at the time was short for Next Gen Portable Gaming, their codename for the PS Vita. Now, Sanzaru believed that Sly would be a good fit for the Vita, simply because handheld gaming devices like the PSP were a good fit for the platformer genre, as they tend to do pretty well on the platform, like Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, Little Big Planet, and 2006's Daxter, which at the time this presentation was dated, Daxter was the #1 selling first-party title on the PSP and the third best-selling PSP title overall, so it was a real no-brainer to put Sly on the Vita. They also included the target dates for which the alpha, beta, and master builds of the game would be completed by, starting 5 months after the release of the Sly Collection in November 2010, although the game would still have to go through much more work and much more polish before the official launch in early 2013. Now, some of you might have already noticed the term ThiefNet that's brought up throughout this entire presentation, and you're probably wondering what it is. Well, basically speaking, it's how Sanzaru initially planned on blurring the lines between a single-player experience and a social gaming experience, with a strong emphasis on collection while maintaining the core gameplay of the series, thus creating the ThiefNet, which consists of the single-player campaign where you can earn exclusive gadgets for this new mode. With those, the treasures, and the loot that you had gathered, all of that carries over over to your hideout, allowing for customization of not just your hideout, but also your character. Now, if this is already sounding familiar, it's because the final version of Sly 4 already allowed you to unlock skins via collectible Sly masks, and the treasures you acquire are stored in your hideout via the treasure wall. But the part about creating and upgrading your hazard room, then breaking into other players' hideouts, surviving their hazard rooms, and stealing the treasure to gain experience, and ultimately enhance gameplay, while it does sound a bit like King of Thieves, there is actual footage of these hazard rooms and how they can be customized in action. But this feature was ultimately cut from the final version of the game, alongside many other features and mini-games that were originally planned to be featured in the game, like Murray's monster truck racing missions, which made use of tilting the PS Vita to make Murray steer in the direction you want. Oh boy, I can already imagine the pain of trying to do this in an actual moving vehicle. Even on the Switch, it's virtually impossible to do anything. But on the bright side, this minigame technically still made its way into the final version of the game, albeit as a brief vehicle section in the prologue episode. Now, the Spark Runner minigame did actually survive being cut from the game, primarily because the PS3's DualShock-free controllers all featured some sort of gyro capabilities. Although, it's mentioned that Spark Runner was one of at least 5 different hacking mechanics. In the final version of Sly 4, we only got 3, which were the classic style ones, the auto-scroll ones, and Spark Runner. So I'm left to wonder what the other 2 were like before they got cut. As for some of these other features, like using the touchscreen to figure out vault combinations, or the Banaki-Con being controlled using the Vita's gyro features, if any of that stuff actually made it into that version of the game, I honestly have no clue because I have not gotten to play any version of Sly 4 whatsoever. I'm really just going by what I've actually seen of the game online, primarily the PS3 version. So if any of you guys can confirm if anything else in this pitch made it into Sly 4's Vita port, please let me know down in the comments because I am completely clueless in this area. But anyways, let's rewind back to the ThiefNet. Since this concept of building your own hideouts and hazard rooms was cut from the game for unknown reasons, this means the planned QR code integration was also cut. And basically how these would work, since the PS Vita had a built-in camera feature, it could scan these codes from advertisements, web pages, other game award systems, etc, etc. When scanned, these codes would unlock elements within the game or trigger instant downloads. In the case of what's shown in the presentation, this code unlocked a gem. Now, before we get to the next bit of information that we learned from this presentation, I just need to point out that Sly 4 had a budget of $9 million, with the team expecting to break even with $2.5 million. Now, I'm no expert in game budgets, considering we don't exactly see those numbers like we do with movies. Sometimes we do, it's just not very often, but more times than not, it's for bigger budget titles like Call of Duty. But $9 million is still pretty impressive just for one Sly Cooper game, and I can see why Sony allowed so much, because the sales of the original trilogy all add up to almost $29 million in total. This doesn't even count the Sly collection on the PS3 and the Vita, because Sanzaru had yet to release it. But while we're here, we've also got to look at the official number of copies sold for each game in the original trilogy. Yes, I'm aware that VG charts exists, but you gotta remember that their numbers aren't exactly accurate. And this right here kind of proves that when we go adding up all the numbers and comparing them side by side. According to Sanzaru, Sly 1 sold about 1.5 million copies on the PS2. Sly 2 sold about 1.35 million copies on the PS2, with Sly 3 selling around 1.25 million PS2 copies. Now, VG Chart's website hasn't updated anything on their site concerning the Sly games since I last checked the numbers in 2019, and they're still showing that Sly 1 sold about 300,000 copies less than the official numbers, Sly 2 selling 500,000 copies more than it actually did. I don't know how they managed to get that number, and then Sly Free selling almost 400,000 copies less than it actually did. So there's some pretty big differences there, and it just goes to show that VG charts isn't exactly the best place to go to try and find accurate sales numbers. That was just something I wanted to go ahead and throw out there before moving on. Under the risk and success portion of the video, there was a rather interesting statement saying that the game, implying Sly 4, must be perceived to be a reinvention of the franchise and not just another Sly Cooper game. Now again, I haven't played Sly 4. I've seen the cutscenes and various gameplay videos, but was the final product really a reinvention of the series? Well, in terms of a lot of areas compared to the originals, I'd say yes. With the exception of that cliffhanger ending that might never get resolved due to the Egypt episode being cut from the game, supposedly because of the PS Vita's limitations, but this was intended to be developed and released as DLC sometime after the launch of Thieves in Time, which sadly never happened because Sony apparently never gave a green light on such a DLC for whatever reason, and I'm sure the sales numbers also had a lot to do with why this DLC never happened, thus never getting a resolution to this cliffhanger, and that still bugs me to this day. But speaking of DLCs that never happened, the presentation featured what was called co-op specific DLC episodes, where you and another player can control one of two Sly Coopers at a time, which would have been a first for the series to have a co-op story mode if this ever happened, albeit they're just DLCs that aren't connected to the main story mode. But this raises a very important yet canonical question. Is this Sly's twin brother? Sorry, I just couldn't resist that. It was too good. But jokes aside, we don't really have an idea as to what the stories were supposed to be for these DLC episodes, but the presentation ends with 2 episodes that never made it into the game, and doesn't really explain if these were meant for the main story or for the co-op DLC. The first one is a Transylvania-themed level, which we first heard about back when Sanzaru's Matt Kramer shared a couple of pieces of concept art for this level over on his Facebook page, alongside the name Network of Thieves. But this time, we've gotten a much better, more realized look at this level, and honestly, I would have loved to see this make it into the game, especially because the game lacked a supernatural or a paranormal themed level, unlike the original trilogy. The villain of this level, who we actually get to see concept art of, is known as Dr. Mortimer. At least, that's the name according to the Network of Thieves post, but here they're referring to him as Count Dracula. This particular episode was going to have a Scooby-Doo haunted cover-up style parody, with Mortimer, or Dracula, turning out to actually be a vegetarian fruit bat. And the other cut episode was one where the gang head off to find and steal the treasures of the creature from the Black Lagoon, only to discover that a megalomaniac tadpole is in control of a very large and simple-minded alligator, which honestly sounds hilarious just thinking about it. Last thing before ending the video, during this presentation, we can see a piece of concept art from the cancelled 2005 Sly Cooper PSP game that was originally planned by the now defunct Vigil Games, which also seemed to have a focus on time travel. Now, I'm not going to go any further into this particular topic because I'm sure this video is already long enough, but if you guys are curious about this cancelled Sly PSP game and want to know a bit more about it, I'll leave a link down in the description below to VTNVIVI's video where he discusses this subject in much greater detail. But other than that, guys, that's all I've really got for this video, going over Sanzaru's pitch for Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. As always, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, please be sure to leave it all down in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell to stay up to date with anything and everything Sly Cooper as it happens. And hopefully that's soon, because Sly's been stuck in a desert for more than 8 years. I'm sure he's pretty thirsty right now. Anyways, once again, thank you all so much for watching and for constant support. I've been Blueknight, and I'll see you guys back here next time.